Hi everyone, my name's Declan McGlynn. Welcome to Friday Forum Live. Point Blank's weekly broadcast bringing you exclusive tutorials, artist interviews and industry insight every Friday live from East London. Today we are joined by our mastering instructor Anthony Chapman to find out more about iZotope's latest update to their mastering software Ozone. So today we are diving deeper into Ozone 7 to see what's new, but if you want to learn mastering techniques and a lot more about our music production courses, make sure you check out our website, pointblanklondon.com, and remember, we are totally live. So get your questions in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the broadcast. And while you're there, make sure you hit that subscribe button for more tutorials. So Anthony, welcome back.
Thank you, yeah.
It seems like yesterday we were talking about Ozone 6.
It does seem rather recently,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm not sure what the actual figure is about how, but it seems to be a pretty quick update.
Yeah.
But
is it substantial? Is it more of an incremental thing? I mean,
it's kind of a bit of both. The stuff that I want to concentrate on today is the truly new stuff, which is the vintage modules and the codec preview, both of which I've been playing with since it came out, and I'm really enjoying it actually. Funnily enough, I've been using some of the vintage modules in. I've actually used them in a couple of mixes, so I've actually been not just for mastering. No, absolutely. But also, yeah, the codec preview as well is really like a cool feature that previously, you would have had to pay for a separate plugin.
Yeah,
to be able
I remember
to do.
there was a Anyway, someone made another one. Yes. I won't try and pronounce that. Someone tried to make one, and the codec preview is essentially you can preview what it might sound like in 128 MP3, 320.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Cool.
So yeah, so like I said, it's mainly. God, this rain is pretty crazy, isn't
probably
it?
Hear
I don't know
that
if you guys
rain.
can hear it. So it's kind of an incremental update, but there is some new stuff in it as well. If you've used Ozone 6, it's all going to be totally familiar. It's basically laid out exactly the same.
Right.
Let me get my little niggle out of the way first. The interface is on the standalone app is still the same size. I'm sure iZotope have got a good reason for it, but you can see I've got my screen zoomed in and it's a little bit on the small side. I kind of wish it was scalable somehow, but then again, maybe that would break some of their design choices, so who knows. But do you want me to dive into
let's
it?
do it.
Yeah.
So this track that you've got, maybe we can introduce that first. It's from a student, right?
Absolutely. So this is a track by Dream Trip, who is a guy who was a student who I taught. And this is the unmastered version. I mixed this. This is the unmastered version, so you can see it's relatively quiet. You can see my peak levels here of around about -6 dB. It'll probably, look, you see it's gone over, -5.3. As I always say to students, my mastering students, I always say -6 dB, but really what it is you're aiming for -6 dB for your mixed, the pre-master.
Yeah.
If it's a little bit higher than that, that's fine, it's not a problem. The reason I always say -6 is because if you go for -6, you're not going to clip. You're going to have plenty of headroom there to make sure at the pre-master stage you're not clipping it. You need to keep it clean at that stage. So this is a track it's got I think it's a girl group called Amity Ray. It's got Beanie Man on it as well. So it's really fun to mix. Good track. And basically what I want to do, I've took the unmastered version and I just want to throw some of the new modules on it. By no means is this me doing a master in FFL today, but it's just using it as raw materials to show you some of the stuff. So what I want to start with is the vintage tape module, okay? And basically the idea of this is it's trying to give you all of the positive elements that you would get from using tape in a mastering environment. So if I think back to when I was first going and doing masters in the early 90s, I don't mean as a mastering engineer, I mean as an artist going to mastering studios, usually it was the tracks you were mastering were on analog tape. They would have been mixed down to 1/4" tape or to 1/2" tape, 1/2" if you could afford it. That was the really good stuff. And everyone kind of knew that one of the reasons we used that was because there was a warmth and also a good distortion that you would get. Especially if you had quite an aggressive track, if you drove it really hard at the mixdown stage on the tape, it would sound great. Mm-hmm. So what iZotope are trying to do here is give you something that you can use to simulate some of those positive elements you used to get from tape. But they're being quite clever about it, because what they've not done is included any of the noise or anything like that.
Right.
And I actually really like that, because you know, not naming any names, but a certain very, very prominent plugin manufacturer, one of their favourite things is enabling that noise button by default on their plugins. And half the time I find I'm doing a mix and I've got, you know, 50 of those plugins, and I can hear some hiss, and I'm having to hunt around all the plugins to find which one has got the noise button turned on. Because I love the distortion and stuff like that. I don't want the noise. I'm not interested in the noise. The noise isn't what I love to tape for. So, so if I just run this here, now, the way iZotope talk about this, they say that if you just drop it in the default setting, this is going to give you effectively the sort of impact that it would have if it was just mastered at a normal level onto tape, okay? But we can actually drive it harder, okay? Now this track, I've not, you know, the peak level's not too high, so I've probably got quite a lot of scope to drive it quite hard. If, you know, if we were really sort of driving it hard, we would start to hear it distort noticeably. Now, believe it or not, in some instances, I actually find that really pleasant. Generally not with electronic music, unless it's like digital hardcore or something like that, you know, they're showing my age there. But generally speaking, you know, with this kind of track, I would probably try and just drive it a little bit to give it a bit of a kind of touch, you know? Then we've got the bias here, and you're going to have to excuse me while I try and remember which way around this goes, because I always forget which way around it goes. I believe, if I remember rightly, if we give it negative bias, it will enhance the high frequencies a little bit, okay? This is basically the same technique as, I think it was called under-biasing of tape machines, where people would under-bias it and you would get more top end. And then similarly, the other way around, if you push it up, you're going to get less top end, it's going to be a bit warmer. So this is a really very subtle thing you can use to try and affect that. Now, the speed of the tape here, 30 IPS, inches per second, or 15 IPS, that's going to affect some of the things that we're doing here. If you do it at the 15 IPS, it's going to affect whereabouts the low frequency bump here is going to come, because if it's running at a different speed, it's going to be at a slightly different frequency. Similarly with the harmonics, but generally speaking, I just find that, you know, if we drive this a little bit, if we just massage it a touch with this, it is really nice. And I think one of the things I really like as well about this is that they haven't put loads of effort into making a flashy graphical interface with an animated tape machine.
Which takes up CPU.
It takes up CPU and doesn't serve any purpose whatsoever. And they haven't included the noise, they've just kept it really simple. And I have actually tried this out on a couple of tracks, and it's worked out really well for me. It is subtle, you know, it's not the kind of thing that you're going to drop in and instantly go, whoa, that's totally different. But to be honest, in mastering, that's what I want. You know, I don't want insane, wild effects when you just drop something in normally. So that's the vintage tape. I really think I'm going to be using that a lot. And again, I can also imagine using it in mixing as well. So maybe we won't tell iZotope, but I can totally imagine using that in mixing. Now, one thing I would say is I am running Ozone 7 Advanced here. I'm pretty sure that the stuff that I'm going to be showing you today is in both versions, but I would recommend, if you're thinking about buying it, just double check. Also, if you're thinking about buying it, I think they've got bundles at the moment which are kind of crazily good value. So you really, really should check it out. If you've got a previous version of Ozone as well, even if it's a standard one, you can upgrade to Advanced 7 for not much money at all. So it's worth looking at, definitely. Remember, with Advanced, you get all the individual plugins as well for the different modules. So if we go to the vintage EQ, okay? So this is essentially, what they've tried to do here is emulate what we would call a Pultec style EQ, but it's actually a sort of a hybrid of a couple of different kinds of EQ. And I'm an old hand, you know, and even I fired this up and I had to sit there and look at the interface for a minute.
Doesn't look
and really
familiar.
Yeah, really kind of try to get my head around it. And again, I think mainly because iZotope have just kept it in their design, you know, they've kept it to their design. I'm used to seeing plugins like this, like the Waves or the IK Multimedia or the UAD, where, you know, it looks like an old Pultec. again, for me, when I see that, I know exactly what everything is. But with this, I just had to take a little while to get used to it. But basically, this is a very restrictive EQ. Like, you can only do certain things with it, but it's very sweet. It's very, very sweet. So, for example, if we take a look at the high cut here, okay? If I put that up to the 20K, so you can see we have got a really subtle kind of attenuation on the top end there, you know? It's very, very, you see how long it goes before it comes down there. It's not, certainly no low pass filter, you know? It's very, very subtle. Similarly, if we go to the high boost here, and this is one of my sort of hobby horses in mastering, teaching mastering, is you need to really be careful with the high frequencies, but it's really important not to lose them because there's so much definition carried in, especially for dance music, you know, because if you think about it, the transients in high frequencies is going to hit you before anything else. So it's really, really important. And then if we look here, so I've put that all the way up as high as it will go to 16K. And if we push this up here, so it's very, really tasty, very sweet.
Yeah,
you know?
I think a lot, we were just talking before we started about people just going too excited or cranking it up.
Exactly.
It becomes very brittle and loses a lot of its warmth.
Absolutely.
It seems to be able to give it some without losing anything.
Yeah, definitely. It's really, really sweet, you know, and we can alter the shape of it slightly here. You see, if I push the Q up, we get a kind of a little bump. If I bring that down a bit, we can see it a bit more. So as I push the Q up, we get that little bump. But you see, this is all about subtlety, this EQ. It's very, very much about making very, very subtle changes. We've got the low boost and low cut here. So for example, you know, if I think about classic area where sometimes if I want to give something more body on the kick drum, 60 Hertz I would probably look at. And that's quite, you know, that's doing a lot. It's a very bassy track. So, yeah. But we've also got the low cut there as well. So basically, this is simulating like on Pultec EQs where each band would have two knobs, one for boost and one for cut. And sometimes people will actually use both of them to get exactly what it is they want. So they'll kind of like play them off against one another. So it works really well. And then we've got a really nice mid cut here. If we go, so if I go down to like 200 or 300 Hertz, which I always think of as like the mud zone, that's like, you know, there's usually so much stuff, there's real congestion down there, and we can kind of just bump that out a bit there. So it's very subtle, but you can do some really nice stuff with it. So that's before I did anything. So you see what I mean? It's kind of subtle, but it has a real sweet sound, you know? Yeah. I really, really think it's worth spending the time with. Obviously, being iZotope, we can run it in MS as well, which is fantastic for mastering. I really, really like that a lot. I always use that in Ozone, I always use that in conjunction with the imager. Let's put it back in the center. And you know, a lot of the time, quite early in the chain, I might use the imager just to mono the bottom end. You know, it's again dance music, absolutely crucial. For me personally, you know, I find as the time goes on, I creep up higher and higher where I go to mono. At the moment, a lot of my masters, I'm going up to 200 Hertz in mono, because I just find it's much more focused. And then if you hear it on a big system, it's much more punchy, you know, and there's much less risk of phase problems down there. Shall I continue?
Yes,
yeah. Okay, so keeping on the vintage side of things, we've got this vintage compressor here, and this is basically a single band compressor, but with a real sweet, slightly warm kind of vintage feel to it. Okay, one of the big things, we've got the detection filter up here. Now it's not the same as some compressors that you would use for mastering, where you can really brutally filter what the compressor is hearing. So remember what I'm doing.
Just have like a high pass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So basically, if I solo that, that's what the compressor is hearing, and it will the high pass will only go up there to about 400, and it's quite a sort of elongated curve, but that's fine, because basically what I want to do is I want to reduce the amount of bass getting into the compressor so that the kick drum's not making the compressor just like suck massively.
Yeah, that's a classic problem where you put a compressor on a track and then the bass hits it first because it's the loudest point.
Exactly.
And then nothing else benefits from the compressor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in mastering, generally speaking for me, with programmed compression like this, where I've got the whole track going through it, I want to try, and the loudest bits of the track, which a lot of time would be kick and snare, I want it to be roughly the same amount of compression. I don't want the compressor to react massively off the kick and then a little bit off everything else, because it's just going to tonally unbalance the track. But if we just have a quick listen, you know, if we use this balanced model, and if I start to wind this down. So we're getting sort of 3 to 4 dB of compression there, max. We had a bit of makeup gain. A little tip that you know I always say to students is, with compression, this is the same for mixing as it is for mastering. With makeup gain, don't look at the numbers, just use your ears. Because if your maximum amount of compression, like there, is 4 dB, that doesn't mean you should be adding 4 dB makeup gain, because it's dynamic. You know, it's non-linear. You just need to set your makeup gain and listen and make sure it's broadly the same. So this, you know, for me, look, I've just put that in. I've just used the factory setting. I've tweaked the detection filter a bit. That's great. That's just really sweet, you know. And this is the kind of compression that really I'm looking for in mastering, is pretty transparent. You know, I don't want it to sound really like, you know, pumpy. Sometimes that's what people want, sometimes, but usually I would think of that more at the mix stage. You would be trying to make something pump if that's what the track needed. If you're doing like, you know, French house, 90s style or something like that.
Yeah.
But in mastering, I want to keep it quite subtle. And that's great. That's working really, really well. And we also have the vintage limiter as well. Now, when they updated Ozone to 6.1, they added some new stuff in the maximizer anyway, okay? And in Ozone 7, they've also added this 4th IRC mode, which I haven't had a chance really to play with to any level. But some of the limiter models in 6 already had been tweaked, and there was some good sort of vintage style stuff going on. But this vintage limiter, I think it's fantastic. So I actually used this on the master of this track, which I didn't do in the Ozone app, but my final limiter was the vintage limiter from Ozone 7, because I found it was working really, really well. And it's kind of your classic Ozone limiter. It kind of looks the same as everything else. It defaults to this tube setting. One thing, generally speaking for me, I always turn on true peak limiting, because basically what that's trying to do is it's trying to protect against clips in the analog domain. So, you know, you'll get, even if you've got a hard limiter set with a ceiling of minus 0.3, say, you still might get clips. Like when you go when it goes digital to analog, you can still get clips there. Right. Some meters are really good at measuring that. The Dora meter from Waves has got a light that comes on if it detects one. BX meter that I use all the time, that's got a little light at the top which shows you. So it's really important still, I believe, I know some people don't, but I believe to keep that little bit of headroom just to protect yourself against it. But if you use true peak limiting here, that should protect you there. I always go minus 0.3 dB. Again, I read loads of stuff, people say you don't need to do that anymore, but I'm kind of set in my way, you know. But if we just start to crank this, so this is going to get a little bit louder now. So you see, the interesting thing about it is the level is going way past the threshold, but it's only actually limiting a little bit. And this is just the character of this limiter model. But what I really like about it is, like, you can really, really start to wind it on. Now, that's showing us RMS of, it's getting up to about minus 4 dB at its loudest. That's pretty loud at the moment, you know, but sounds pretty transparent to me. Now, there's one thing I should say is, the way I'm going these days in limiting is I tend to use a clipper and then a limiter. So I tend to use, at the moment I'm using Kazrog K-Clip, which is, I'd say anybody out there, if you're thinking about mastering, if you want something to go along with this, I think it's $10 at the moment for like the next week. It's normally only $20. But basically all it is a little plugin where you just drive it into that clipping point, but you've got control over how it clips. So there's like a soften control, which will give it soft clipping. So what I tend to do now is, before I go into the limiter here, I'll drive it into that clipping point then I'll use the limiter.
Right.
Because I often find that limiters just work better if it's already loud. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I could be imagining it. Like, a lot of the time I used to use 2 limiters. I used to use one to lift it up and then one to really slam it and make it loud.
So the clipping is kind of acting like a normalization in a way.
Kind of, yeah, absolutely. But I still find just using this on its own, it sounds great. It's really, really good. It's, it's very smooth. It's very sort of transparent. I think I'm going to be using it a lot. Even though for me nowadays, I don't use the app of Ozone as a standalone that much. Occasionally I do. If I'm on the move and I need to do something really quickly, I will. But I use the plugin and the plugins all the time. The multibands that we covered last time, I still think that's really great. I prefer that to any of the, no, I won't name any names, but any of the other manufacturers' ones. That's my favourite, multiband dynamics module. So I think it's really great. And there's one sort of last new thing that I kind of want to look at. And this is really interesting. This is the codec preview. If I turn this on here. So basically, we can preview what this is going to sound like when it goes to a lossy format.
Right.
So it's defaulted to AAC. Let's go to MP3. And we'll set it to 128K. So this is basically what your track's going to sound like on SoundCloud, because everything on SoundCloud, that you stream, is at 128K MP3. Now, not all MP3 encoding is equal, and 128K now, if it's done well, can sound okay for like portable listening purposes. Back in the day, 128K was pretty rotten.
Yeah.
I remember first hearing it thinking it was incredible, and then I listened back to those files and I'm like, oh, what was I thinking? I think we all got dazzled a bit by it.
By the file size.
Exactly. So if I play it, so what we're hearing now is 128K MP3 encoded. Let me just reset the meter there, because we did actually get a clip there. Creeping up.
So is that 128 causing that?
Let's see. It could well be the codec preview. That's interesting. I hadn't spotted that before, I have to say.
We've talked about, you mentioned that about in the conversion process, sometimes you'll get a couple of 0 point
absolutely
decimal dBs added.
Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. One thing to remember as well, and I know this is something that there was a bit of controversy in the comments about this last time, is that in Ozone we've got this effective gain bypass, the ear, and if you use that and then you bypass and you're using the limiter, you will see clips on the master because it will add gain so you hear the same volume. But here, it could well be the codec preview, but this is the really interesting thing about the codec preview is, if I click this solo codec artifacts,
wow.
If you can hear that, that's what it's taking out. That's the difference between the original track and the 128K MP3.
It's quite a lot of information.
Exactly. Yeah. And if we go down, so you see in 96K MP3, that's crazy how much there is. But if we go all the way up to 320, much less. So it's quite a useful little tool to just see. I'm a bit agnostic about this kind of thing in terms of how much I would use it in the mastering process, because my worry is that I don't think it's necessarily productive to mix or master with 128K MP3 in mind.
Especially as it's not feature-proof.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's useful to get an understanding of what is happening with your masters when they go to a lossy format. Personally, I don't think I would be like, I would never really want to be doing masters thinking, oh, I've got to master this way because it's going to go on SoundCloud.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think that's productive for anybody really. So, Yeah, so that's kind of the shape of it, the new stuff. I don't know if anybody's wanting to ask any questions.
Got loads of questions.
Oh, good.
Stephen Nielsen likes your t-shirt, first of all.
Oh, thank you.
Chris Mikes is saying, does Ozone 7 work with Windows 8.1? I assume it does.
I believe so. I have to confess, I'm not a Windows guy, but I'm pretty sure I'd be extremely surprised if it didn't.
Right, yeah.
Because I mean, Windows, 8.1 is the last major update of 8, and obviously we've got 10 now, so I'd be very, very surprised if it didn't work with 8.1. I'd check on the iZotope website, have a look at their compatibility charts.
For sure. GCTV's wondering, what's the difference between Ozone 6 and Ozone 7? Kind of covered that.
Yeah, but, basically everything that I've looked at so far, that's the new stuff.
Vintage.
All the vintage modules, the codec preview, that is essentially it. There is other stuff as well. Like I said, in the standard maximizer, they've added a new mode there. I've not really had a chance to try that out yet. But this is most of the stuff. I mean, I've got to be honest, I was very impressed, because at first when I heard 7 was coming, I was like, oh, that's a bit soon. But then when I saw the way they were handling the upgrades, it's like, oh, actually, you know what, that's totally reasonable. And there's also opportunities out there with those bundles for people to upgrade this and also get RX and
right.
Nectar and stuff like that as well. And so, you know, I think they're handling it quite well. But if you want to know what's different in 7 is basically what I've been looking at today.
Yeah,
okay.
Just rewind this video. David Bora is asking about the maximizer, and he's saying, if you could explain in depth how the maximizer actually works.
Oh my goodness,
Not
right.
too in depth.
Yeah. Well, essentially, I mean, if we take out the vintage limiter and we put the maximizer in. So the thing you've got to remember about the maximizer is, maximizer is iZotope language. It's just iZotope language for limiter. Right. It's funny that there's the vintage limiter, but it's still the maximizer. You know, they didn't call it the vintage maximizer. But basically, what is happening here is, as we pull the threshold down, it's essentially pushing the audio into this threshold point, at which point it's just going to stop letting any audio go past that level. So
it's a brick wall limiter.
It's a brick wall limiter, but basically I think sometimes what confuses people is the fact that it's got a threshold, whereas a lot of people are kind of used to factory limiters in Logic and things like that, which have gain. You know, so basically in the factory limiter in Logic, you've got the gain control, and that's how you drive it into the brick wall. And basically all iZotope have done is it's same as the Waves L2 and stuff like that, and Pro L's not like that. Pro L's got gain, so it's just the same kind of thing, but they've just rejigged it. And essentially, you know, it's the way I learned how to use this was just set the ceiling to -0.3, so you're just away from the clipping point. I just started off with the default settings there. I mean, to be honest, when I was using this a lot, this maximizer a lot, I was always using IRC3 on balanced. And I like, as I've said before, I like to use that true peak limiting. And then, as we start to push this down, you can see here, this is showing us how much gain is going into the brick wall. Right. So, you know, it's...
How much has been shaved off.
Exactly, yeah. So basically, you know, it's maximum, I think it's going about 4 dB over the threshold. And then if we look here, on the meter here, you can see that it's going up no higher than that -0.3. And with the meter here, the darker readout is the peak level, so that's the immediate level, which is with the limiter set like, with the maximizer, sorry, set like this. It's always going to go up to that -0.3. The lighter stuff is the RMS, and the RMS level in mastering is really our Bible, because that tells us how loud something actually is. It's effectively an averaged level over a certain period of time. So, you know, any kind of pop or rock or dance music, the peak level is always going to be pretty much maximum. The RMS is going to tell you how loud the track actually is.
And you can, I mean, it's all to taste, but anything between -11 to like -6.
Yeah, for me, -10 is where loud starts. Like that's the little mnemonic I always use. Is as soon as you get up to -10. So when I was talking about using a clipper, I'll usually use the clipper to get it to about -11, -10.5. Then I'll use my maximizer or limiter at the end to do the final push to exactly where I want to put it. You know, the thing is, you will get commercial if you. I always encourage my students to do critical listening. You know, buy some commercial stuff of the kind of style you're into. There's lossless files off Beatport, get AIFs, you know, something like that, or get stuff off Bandcamp, and put it in your DAW and use your favourite metering. software to just kind of get to know it a little bit, and see what they're doing. Sometimes you'd be I know I'm kind of horrified when I have clients go, oh, I want it to sound like this, and they send me like a commercially released track. There was a track I had that was on Mad Decent that somebody sent me, oh yeah, I want to achieve that kind of volume. And I put it into, I was using Studio One, I put it in Studio One, and it was like -2 RMS at the drop. And I was just like, right, okay. Wow. And to be honest, the only way they got that level was when you put it in the Spectrum, you saw at about 105 hertz, there was like a huge like gouge dug out of it. And basically all they'd done was gone, well look, we want more volume, so we're just going to sacrifice this kind of high bass so that we can just push bass, it. Yeah, so we can push it even further into the limiter. And it's always a difficult thing for someone in my position because that's what the client wants. I think it's crazy, but I kind of got to do my best to deliver it. If it was my music, I would not be doing that. But I'm not a Luddite. Don't get me wrong. I like a nice, loud and proud master, but that's crazy. That's crazy.
So much, as much of what's going into the limiter is important as the settings.
Exactly. There's a mastering engineer, Klaus Hill. Who's like I've known for years. Who's like a kind of, but he used to make breakbeat and stuff like that. He's in Australia now, brilliant mastering engineer. He always says the potential for loudness starts with the mix. The way when I'm mastering, I'm always looking for that appropriate loudness. I'm not thinking, oh, it needs to be this loud. I'm just listening to see how loud can I get it. Oh, hang on, it's starting to sound a bit distorted. Let's back it off. Yeah, that's about how loud it should be. That's what I'm looking for.
Right.
So.
Cool. Pepe Kebabo's asking, will there be a subscription type payment option for this? I don't think there is.
Not at the moment, no. I don't. iZotope haven't gone down that slightly sticky route yet. That's a huge thing. That could almost be a subject of a kind of round table style FFL in the future to talk about that. Because there's so many people doing that now.
Yeah, exactly. Logic Pro MIDI Hub, very specific question. If I already have Ozone 7 and Sonomus Blitzen and SK Note round tone, do I still need Ozone 7 Advanced?
Ooh, right. Well, as far... I would need to know if... I can't remember if... Can you host plugins in the regular Ozone? I'm pretty sure you can. But basically, if what they're saying is, if they've got those devices, do they need something like Ozone? I actually think Ozone, if you're already, judging from that Sonomus one, this is somebody who's quite deep into it, I actually think Ozone is brilliant value for money in terms of the actual processors. For me personally now, I don't really think about Ozone as the kind of standalone app. I think about the processors because I'm almost always using a mix of different processors. The thing is, talking about limiters like we were there, I've got so many limiters now, but I've got them for a reason because generally speaking, the first limiter I try usually isn't the one that I end up using because generally there's one out of the bunch that I've got will work really well on that track. Yeah. I think it's worth looking at. I think the price is so good and the stuff that you get for it. If you just look at you get so many modules now, it's absolutely crazy. If you get advanced as well, each one of those modules you're going to get as an individual plugin as well. But you can just host Ozone as a plugin if you've got the regular version and just use one module at a time. I don't think the CPU load is that much bigger. So
okay, cool. David's wondering if you use transient control for your well-shaved beard.
Maybe I should actually. I do use transient control. I do use transient control in mastering sometimes though.
There you go.
So it is something I use a fair bit. I have to apply it to this though.
A few more people are asking about is it worth upgrading to advanced, and I think we kind of covered that already. Ori Main's asking, has this replaced any previous plugin you used to use? You've always been using Ozone, but have you stopped using a different plugin as Ozone has advanced?
Okay, I would say the one thing in Ozone that I use much less than I used to is the imager. And that's because I'm a BX Digital guy. So Plugin Alliance, BX Digital version 2, which has the mono maker knob.
And
which
the stereo width knob as well.
Yeah, and I think BX Digital version 2 is, if you want to do mastering, you have to have that. That's the one thing I would say. It can do stuff that no other plugin can do anywhere near as easily. people, honestly, I show it to students and they almost go when they see it because it's so scary when you look at it first.
Yeah.
Honestly, an hour with it and you'll be fine. You'll get used to it. Little tip: Plug-in Alliance always have huge Christmas sale. They have their advent calendar. Okay.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
So if you're thinking about check it out. I know JC did some really good videos on it.
Yeah.
But hold off mine until they start doing the advent calendar because I got it really cheap.
Yeah, and it is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
All of their stuff is great. Philip PC is wondering if there's a trial available for this. I think you can get a trial.
Yeah, I think there's a demo. Yeah, I've got a feeling if you just download it, it functions as a trial straight away. So I've got a feeling you might get a 30-day demo of it. I think you have to double check that with iZotope, but there's definitely a trial of some description available.
All right, nice one. And finally, High Flown's wondering, should you limit a track first or should you make it loud afterwards?
It depends what you mean. If you mean should you limit it at the mix stage, no. Right. I always say definitely don't do that. At the mix stage, I don't believe that you want to be doing any kind of really clipping of any amount at all. Even if it's a tiny amount, I just think you need to leave that for mastering. Yep. My personal philosophy now that I've been, it seems to work well for me is using the clipper, so K-clip, that casual K-clip, using a clipper to essentially make it loud, like get it to that minus 10 dB, then use a limiter afterwards to do the final push. And also using a limiter will give me a bit more tweakability, attack and release, stuff like that. If I'm using Pro L, the FabFilter Pro L, that's got huge amounts of tweakability. But to be honest, like I said, when I mastered this track, this is the unmastered version, when I mastered it, I used the vintage limiter in this because I thought it sounded so good, like really, really good.
Nice one.
Cool.
So unfortunately, we are out of time for today's FFL. Hopefully you got plenty of inspiration for the weekend, but if you're thirsty for more, make sure you check out our mastering courses at pointblanklondon.com. We'll be back next weekend for another FFL, so we'll see you then. Cheers.